Bradford pear is a variety of Callery pear. It was introduced in the early 1960s as an ornamental. It was widely planted in home lawns and yards, along sidewalks in various cities, and on college campuses, such as we see here. Quick growth and an adaptability to a wide range of conditions helped fuel this planting spree that we saw throughout the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. However, with any good successful ornamental variety, others quickly popped up. Other varieties of Callery pear were introduced, and when planted nearby one another, what is generally considered a sterile tree that will not produce fruit would produce fruit. They were cross pollinated. Whenever these plants have cross pollinated and produce fruit, that seed is viable, and generally those offspring do produce viable seed themselves. This is where many of our infestations of Callery pear have come from. Bradford pears do have a few issues. They're relatively short-lived compared to some of our other trees that we might find in home landscapes, and they tend to have weak branches and are susceptible to things like ice and snow load. Choosing other trees instead of Bradfords can be more beneficial to the homeowner due to the longevity of a potential replacement and the lack of a weedy tree that could cause issues in the environment. Hello, I'm Gatlin Bunton, Field Specialist in Agronomy with MU Extension, and today we're going to talk about Callery pear. Callery pear is a highly invasive, non-native species that was introduced as an ornamental. We can find it in rural areas, urban and suburban areas, as well as many of our natural spaces throughout the state. But before we get too in-depth about that, we need to talk about Bradford pear. Bradford pear is a variety or a cultivar of Callery pear. This is where many of our issues have started. The main issue with Callery pears is how quickly it can invade an area and displace our desired vegetation. What we can see here is a relatively unmanaged area that has quickly become established in Callery pears. Now, this may not be a very evident problem throughout much of the year, but whenever they're flowering like this, it's pretty easy to make out that we have a problem. In the summertime, it made us look like a big expanse of green. We might think that's good, but it's pretty easy to see here in the spring. Some of our native species also flower in the spring, and we'll go through those a little bit later in the video. Now, some important things to remember about the differences between our cultivated Bradford pear and our Callery pears is, again, our Bradfords are sterile whenever we have them alone. So if we only have a Bradford, we don't have seed production. However, when we have another variety, they have the potential to cross-pollinate, and that's where we get viable seed. And that viable seed is what we see here. These offspring are weedy, they produce viable seed themselves, and they also have some other issues at hand. Those include higher seed production as well as thorns. Now, if we're a bird, the small fruits that we have in the fall, that's a very appetizing treat, and we might carry that for quite a distance, and that might be where a new infestation begins. Some of our native alternatives to Bradford pear or other varieties of Callery pear are things like serviceberry or wild plum. Wild plum is what we see behind me here. Wild plum is one of our early bloomers, so we do have a good white flower early on in the spring. It has a much sweeter smelling flower than what we'd see on a Bradford pear, and those are going to attract our early season pollinators, things like honeybees, whenever they come out early in the spring. Wild plum flowers are a little bit different than what we might see on a Bradford pear. We see that the petals are a little more widely spaced apart. They still do have 5 petals per flower, like that. And we have these very long stamens. We see that we've got a lot of pollen already produced on these, but in relation to the flower, they will have a little bit longer than what we do see on a Bradford pear. Dogwoods are also a good option instead of Callery or Bradford pear. These are identifiable during mid to late spring by their white 4-petaled flowers. This is a good way to differentiate them. Their flowers are more sparsely spaced upon the tree, but these do also have flowers emerge before leaves. So whenever we do have leaf emergence, that's usually when the flowers fall on these, but this can make a good addition to our landscape whenever we consider replacing a Bradford pear. A good alternative to Bradford or other varieties of Callery pear is serviceberry, like what we see behind me. Serviceberry is one of our earliest blooming native trees found in Missouri, and it's easily identifiable by its smooth bark and distinctive flowers. Serviceberry flowers are easily differentiated between those of wild plum, dogwood, or Callery pear. They contain 5 petals, they are widely spaced around the flower, and are about 2 to 3 times longer than they are wide. They have short stamens that are found in the center of the flower and may occur in clusters of 3 or more at each growing point.